Maui is a very special island, just like all of the other islands. But really what stands out to me for Maui is whale watching. So that starts in November and it goes generally till March. I usually like to show up with my children for the weekend in February, just to watch the mama whales and the baby whales kind of breaching together and bring such vibrancy to the part of Lahaina that unfortunately is no longer there.
As soon as I heard that there was a fire that looked like it was out of control, I was at work and we all immediately started talking. And whenever we hear of a disaster, we know that some of our housing is going to be affected.
And what we could see was that it was kind of taking off throughout Lahaina. And what we could also see was that it was really windy. And so the fire looked like it was going to spread pretty quickly. By the time and that was about 4 o'clock. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, we could see social media pictures of people jumping into the ocean because they were escaping all of the flames.
We were regularly getting updates. Those of us at HUD and FEMA and other agencies that deal with disasters, the magnitude was becoming clear, although, of course, over the next few days, as we read the press reports, the enormity of the tragedy and the details and the stories that were coming out really hit home. The intensity of this particular disaster and the very geographically concentrated nature of it was remarkable.
So they had talked about another fire in California a couple of years ago, and I think they thought it was just like that. The fire burned through a town, kind of destroyed it, but they were able to rebuild in a pretty short period of time. What I was trying to convey to them was that this fire was different.
The entire infrastructure was gone in Lahaina. We're talking, water, sewer, electricity, communications possibilities, roads, everything was gone. When you're thinking about restoring people into their homes and rebuilding homes and so forth, that infrastructure is very, very important. It's very key.
The unique feature of this particular disaster was for how many buildings this was just a complete loss. A lot of the disasters we deal with, hurricanes, flooding, tornadoes, the number of properties that were completely burned was overwhelming.
Fire was so intense, I believe it was burning somewhere in the range of about 2,000 degrees. It was melting the rebar in the concrete enclosures for the bank vaults. And so they had to bring in experts to be able to ultimately open these vaults and get into them. There's an impact on anyone that is near a disaster that occurs, and that impact may be loss of job, or it could be loss of home, or loss of ability to communicate with people.
When we could see that people were jumping into the ocean, our first thought was hopefully everyone's able to escape, that there's shelters open for people to escape to, and hopefully there aren't going to be too many people dying throughout this.
Well, I think what most affected us was the lives that were lost. To have lives lost in a fire is really tragic. And so our first thought was of the people, as we've always tried to focus on who is being affected and how they can be helped. And HUD plays a very large role in disaster response. We had people on site quickly. We work very closely with FEMA. From my particular vantage point as the head of the Office of Housing, I immediately started working with my multifamily and single-family team to find out exactly what housing we had in Maui and specifically in the Lahaina neighborhood.
In less than a week from that first meeting with our federal and state partners, we jointly developed a communication plan that included a list of resources that impacted residents could use to get immediate assistance. And this worked well because our local counterparts on the ground in Maui were there to ensure the message was able to get to local residents who needed it.
Initially, really it was trying to get the word out to folks to make sure that their mortgages were not going to go delinquent. That was my biggest worry, that folks will have, they're going to ruin their credit because of the fire.
Commissioner Ikeda's concern was that we had a large number of homes lost. We have people who are no longer in these homes. She had to be concerned with housing for these people, but also those mortgage payments on those homes would still be due. And so she was reaching out to CSBS asking if we could help reach out to the federal agencies and determine what sort of relief could be provided in the form of forbearance from mortgage payments for these victims.
Something we do through our single family insurance program is whenever there's a presidentially declared disaster, we immediately put a foreclosure moratorium in place. And that's not a moratorium just for houses that are affected, because we know that when something like this happens, even if your individual home wasn't burned, that the effect is on the entire community. So we immediately put the moratorium in place for the affected zip codes.
The victims weren't just in Lahaina. We had victims completely on other islands who on a daily basis took ferries into Lahaina to work in the tourism business, for example, or in other businesses. Those people lost their jobs. They could no longer pay their mortgages either. And so they became victims that we needed to help as well.
When we asked for the presidential declaration, we specifically asked for Maui County, not just for the island of Maui. We wanted to make sure that the entire county was surrounded with the presidential declaration so that we could offer assistance to the island of Maui, the island of Lanai, and the island of Molokai.
So the wildfires erupted, I believe, on August 8th. Within a couple of days, FEMA was responding with disaster relief. That's something they're experts at, and they were on site and responding in that way. I believe a day or so later, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation came out with some guidance around the wildfires for financial institutions. And at that point in time, our banking support team at CSBS took note and contacted Commissioner Ikeda. But it wasn't until really a day or two later when she reached out to us and asked for assistance, and that's when I realized we had work to do.
That the one thing that CSBS does very well is to try to organize all of this for the states that are asking for help.
We're used to working with regulated entities, with other regulators, with law enforcement, with a wide variety of agencies and people. So we had a lot of contacts already. I reached out at least by Saturday afternoon to these 5 federal agencies, stated what the problem was. Of course, they were all aware of what was happening on Maui already. That evening, I was already receiving responses at the very highest levels of these federal agencies. And by Sunday, we had already formed the team, the response team, and we were able to meet the very next day, roughly 1 week after the fires erupted.
Well, it was pulled together very quickly, and I think everybody who was contacted was immediately interested in becoming involved. That is not true of every issue in the world. But I think so many of us were thinking and worrying and concerned about the people who were affected and the properties who were affected, that we were very grateful that somebody took the initiative to bring us together, but to bring us together, and most importantly, to bring us together with officials from Hawaii, from Maui. That was incredibly important.
As we have seen from time to time, when the federal and state agencies work together, we can improve the delivery of educational resources and the speed of our policy response so that the people who need help recovering from a disaster get help they need and get it faster.
For me, this is a very real-life confirmation that relationships are everything. Those relationships matter so much, especially when a disaster hits. The ability to communicate with the people we needed to communicate with, and their response in a very human way to what was happening, and their willingness to engage immediately and support our Hawaii commissioner was invaluable in this situation.
We had to forge a partnership, which meant identifying problems, brainstorming solutions, evaluating options, and reaching consensus around a common goal to help the people of Maui. And we did just that.
And I think without that help, I don't think we would have gotten to where we were able to offer a large event with our mortgage servicers, with our banks, and with the federal housing folks.
Throughout this event, we were able to eventually get boots on the ground, actual federal agency folks on the ground to assist consumers.
In October, we visited Maui to assist with a mortgage assistance event. That was a rare opportunity to meet with wildfire-impacted victims who lost their housing and, for many, their livelihoods.
It was very interesting watching the logistics around that. Where could you bring people into the Lahaina area? How do you get them to the Lahaina area? You know, once you landed at an airport, you had to have rental cars, and in the early days, there really weren't any rental cars available.
I think the biggest challenge was trying to figure out if we could stay overnight somewhere. You know, we would literally fly in the morning from Oahu to Maui, make the hour drive to Lahaina, do a little outreach, drive back to Lahaina, catch hopefully the last flight out. You know, we did that with my team, for a month. It was pretty exhausting.
It was useful to hear about how they were showing up, how they were representing us, to get some feedback about what borrowers were saying, about what borrowers were concerned about, while we made plans to get the head of our National Servicing Center to actually go out there himself.
The one thing that we did do back in October was to have a pretty big event for homeowners to talk to their servicers and to talk to their banks and to talk to different housing counselors and the federal housing agencies about what it is that they can do at least for a year.
Well, I think it was important that we sent the head of the National Servicing Center down there, William Collins. That is not something we do at every disaster, and certainly not so far away. And we felt it was really important to demonstrate the extent of our commitment to making sure that all homeowners who needed help could get help. And we felt like it was important to send someone very senior to be there with the mortgage servicers. So if anything arose, any questions arose about interpretation of any of our rules or any of our options, that the person who actually had the authority to say yes or no was right there on site.
What I failed to realize was that those folks that had their homes destroyed also didn't have transportation. And so even though we opened up the Disaster Recovery Center, they couldn't get to us. We had to go to them. We had to take all of the services to all of the shelters, the congregate shelters, since they couldn't come to us. So at the Disaster Center, we had a number of people that came through to talk about their experience. And I think that the one thing that we've learned is really to have our box of tissues at the ready, because we just don't know what's going to happen, right?
Well, some consumers had put their life savings in their home safes, and those safes were not able to withstand a 2,000-degree fire. When they finally got back into their homes and opened their safes to find their cash, and we're talking in many situations large amounts of cash, it was all incinerated. There were just threads left.
They looked at the cash, which was all ashes, swept it all into a bag, went down to their bank to ask for their $250,000 FDIC insurance. I explained to at least a couple of people that the FDIC insurance is only good if the bank fails and if you had your money inside the bank.
I know that Commissioner Ikeda was working with the federal printing agencies to determine, how do you scoop up all these ashes and determine, how much money they had in the safe and whether they could recover any of that money.
There was a woman who came through who talked about the day of the fire. She escaped, or her husband escaped by jumping into the ocean. But she couldn't convince her husband initially to jump in with her because he didn't know how to swim. She thinks they were in the water for about 6 hours before they got plucked out. She was really there to talk about her mortgage, but I think that for her to talk about what they did to really survive the fire, really hit home.
People lost their phones. We lost, cell contact. Mailing somebody something doesn't necessarily get it to them if they're no longer in the home that they were in.
We know that we can call places. Literally we ran out to the different hotels, put up flyers in the lobby, and hoped that people would come to our event.
Just imagine how consumers whose homes are gone, how they're affected. You've lost all records to anything. How do you even begin remembering everything that is involved in your financial makeup? And so what that starts to do is starts to layer significant emotional damage on top of the physical damage they've already incurred.
For us, the event reinforced a sobering realization that Maui has a long road ahead of it as it seeks to recover from the damage and then hopefully rebuild. And while the event was a reminder of a significant tragedy, it has helped us as regulators to understand what level of assistance might be needed to help Maui recover, and the options we must now consider as we continue to monitor the recovery process.
This Lahaina disaster, I think it's just going to last for much longer than we anticipate, right? We are currently thinking that it's going to take a year for the cleanup to happen, one more year for infrastructure to get in place, and then folks can start rebuilding their homes, businesses can start think about rebuilding.
And what we hope with these moratoria and with offering disaster forbearances is that people who are involved in a disaster know that of all the things they have to worry about, paying their mortgage can be pretty far down on the list. They may or may not be able to rebuild. I'm sure for many, many people, insurance will not come close to enabling them to rebuild. But the last thing that any homeowner needs is some kind of, foreclosure action hanging over their head, affecting their credit scores, etc., when instead we can really help people move through this, knowing that no matter what we do, they've lost so much. But if we can make it a little bit easier, we feel it's worth it.
With all of the federal partners, including the FDIC, Federal Reserve Bank, the Office of the Comptroller, and all of the housing agencies, that we'll be able to figure something out. They're great minds thinking about the different policy implications that this fire has brought about.
So there's so many obstacles here, and so we're going to try to keep a special focus on this area for quite some time to come.
This is going to go on for a really long period of time. The recoveries can be long and drawn out, and after many of us have stopped thinking about what happened on August 8th on Maui, some of these agencies will still be doing their day-to-day job of helping those victims recover from this.